in the dream of equality and respect for all people. And may it kindle our dreams when things seem impossible and light our way as we do the hard work of making those dreams more of a reality. We know too that the details of our daily lives are sacred and important, and those small, extraordinary milestones of our lives. More candle in honor of the joys and sorrows we carry in our hearts, but that have not been spoken aloud. And we move into a time of shared sacred silence that we might hear what love is trying to tell us. I invite you into silence. Amen and blessed be. And I have to say, silence with the gurgling of a baby is the best silence there is. Spirit of life.
The reading this morning is an excerpt from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Strength to Love, published in 1963. Courage. The determination not to be overwhelmed by any object, however frightful, enables us to stand up to any fear. Many of our fears are not mere snakes under the carpet. Trouble is a reality in this strange medley of life. Dangers lurk within the circumstance of every action. Accidents do occur. Bad health is an ever-threatening possibility. Evil and pain in this conundrum of life are close to each of us, and we do both ourselves and our neighbors a great disservice when we attempt to prove that there is nothing in this world of which we should be frightened. These forces that threaten to negate life must be challenged by courage, which is the power of life to affirm itself in spite of life's ambiguities. This requires the exercise of a creative will that enables us to hew out a stone of hope from a mountain of despair. We will now expand our circle of care as we gratefully give and receive our Share the Plate offering for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. This is one way we make our care for the world tangible. Will the ushers please come forward?
Thank you so much, Courtney. A service is always better with music. We're grateful to have you. And I will just say too, Sarah had texted, I think Friday, when she wasn't feeling well. So the stories in here, some of you might have heard a couple of the stories before, but I think they're good and worth listening to a second time. And others of you, it'll be brand new. As Brian Stevenson neared graduation, his senior year of college, he came to the startling conclusion that as a philosophy major, no one was going to pay him to philosophize. His frantic search for a postgraduate plan led him to law school. He said mostly because other graduate programs required you to know something about your field of study to enroll. Law school, it seemed, didn't require you to know anything. And my apologies once again to the lawyers in the room and the people who love them. Brian Stevenson was accepted to Harvard Law and simultaneously to a program in public policy at the Kennedy School of Government. But by the end of his first year at Harvard Law, he was having doubts about his choice. He had entered law school hoping to have an impact on the lives of the poor, on America's racial inequality, and the struggle to be equitable and fair with one another. As a Black man coming of age in the US, these were things he thought about deeply his entire life. But after a year of esoteric classes that were disconnected from reality and taught with a sometimes heartless and humiliating Socratic method, he wondered if he had made a mistake. But then he took a short, intensive course on race and poverty litigation. The class required an internship, and he soon found himself traveling to Georgia to intern with the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee, an organization representing death row inmates who would otherwise have no lawyer. For a month, he answered phones and did legal research for a highly dedicated team seeking to help an impossibly large number of people facing execution. One day, Brian Stevenson was asked to drive out to visit a man on death row in rural Georgia because all of the regular staff were working on other cases. He only had to deliver the message that the office did not yet have a lawyer for the man, but that he would not be at risk of execution in the next year. Even so, Brian was terribly nervous, practicing what he would say along the drive. When he arrived, he was led by surly guards into a stark, metallic visitation room. After a while, a man in handcuffs and leg irons was led into the room. The guard unshackled him, smirked at Brian's obvious anxiety, and left. Alone in the room, they shook hands. The other man spoke first. "I'm Henry." And despite all of his practicing, Brian blurted out, "I'm really sorry. I'm sorry. I'm okay. I don't really know. I'm just a law student. I'm not a real lawyer. I'm so sorry. I can't tell you very much, but I don't know very much." And the man looked worried. "Is everything all right with my case?" "Oh, yes, sir. The lawyers at SPDC sent me down to tell you that they don't have a lawyer yet. I mean, we don't have a lawyer for you yet, but you're not at risk of execution anytime in the next year. We're working on finding you a lawyer, a real lawyer. I'm just a law student. I'd be really happy to help." The man grabbed Brian's hands mid-ramble. "I'm not going to have an execution date anytime in the next year?" he asked. "No, sir," Brian said. "They said it would be a year before you got an execution date," which felt to him like such hollow reassurance. You're safe for a year, that's it. But Henry squeezed Brian's hands and said, "Thank you, man. I mean, really, thank you." And then he told Brian, "You're the first person I've met in over 2 years who is not another death row prisoner or a death row guard. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad to get this news." Henry had been so afraid every day that an execution date would be announced that he had told his wife and kids not to visit out of fear that he would have to tell them when he would be killed. And now he was going to call his wife and tell her to come. When Brian and Henry began to talk, human being to human being, they talked about the trial and family and school and music and life. And finally, 3 hours later, a very irritated guard came in and told Brian he had to leave. The guard quickly and angrily tightened the cuffs on Henry to the point that he was clearly in pain. Brian objected to no avail, but Henry just said, "Don't worry about this, Brian. Just come back." And as Henry was being led out of the room, at one point he planted his feet and began to sing until the guard literally shoved him out of the room. That experience was life-changing for Brian Stevenson. He went back to law school and public policy school determined to learn how he could make a difference for people like Henry. In time, he came to understand that in the US, for every 9 people who have been executed, there has been one innocent person who has been exonerated and released from death row. He calls it an astonishing error rate. 1 person found innocent for every 9 executed. He rightly points out that we would never let people fly on airplanes if for every 9 planes that took off, 1 would crash. For every 9 executions, 1 person is found innocent and released. Our society accepts that. As I am sure you know, the racial disparities of death penalty sentencing are enormous. Well, Brian Stevenson became a real lawyer and started the Equal Justice Initiative, an organization dedicated to defending people like Henry and also children, some as young as 13, who have been tried as adults and given life sentences with no possibility of parole. He calls them death in prison sentences, which really is what they are. In 2010, the Equal Justice Initiative successfully argued before the US Supreme Court, which ruled against life in prison without parole sentences, death in prison sentences, for children convicted of non-homicide crimes. And that means that there were states in which children could be sent to prison for their entire lives until they died for something that wasn't homicide. In 2012, their work led to a Supreme Court ruling making mandatory death in prison sentences for children, meaning some states had a requirement that if a child committed a certain crime, they had to be sentenced to life in prison without parole. So that they made that so not that it can't still happen, but it can't be mandatory. So, and goodness knows where we will go from here. The Supreme Court has changed a lot since that time. But that was a significant victory that changed lives, and it might, right, just stick. Brian Stevenson's decades of work championing some of the most vulnerable people in our nation began with that first experience with Henry, when he got proximal, as he calls it. He got close to real people. And when he got close to real people, when he entered their stories, his own story was changed profoundly. Too often, he says, we insulate ourselves from the problems of injustice and suffering. It's not our problem, it's not our burden, it's not our struggle. He urges all of us instead to get proximate. When we are in proximity to real human beings who are suffering because they are poor or have been targeted, mistreated, or villainized, when we are in proximity to those real human beings and start to hear their story, it is much harder to distance ourselves from their humanity. Whatever defenses we have up to shield us from a fellow human being suffering, to somehow believe that their suffering, their brokenness, is different from our own. When we're close to people, when we hear their stories, when we see them before them, that melts away. When we get proximal, when we allow our lives to be touched by the lives of those who are suffering, we allow our own hearts to be touched, and that changes us. As Brian Stevenson says, there is power in proximity. But he also warns that it shouldn't be taken lightly. When Bryan Stevenson was a young lawyer just starting his work in Alabama with the Equal Justice Initiative, he met Ms. Johnny Carr. And you may or may not know her name, but she was one of the key organizers of the Montgomery bus boycott. Dr. King was a public face, but that boycott happened because of a circle of everyday leaders and everyday people working together who busted their rears and took significant risk for themselves to pull it off. And Miss Johnny Carr was a key organizer. She devoted her life to civil rights. In the 1930s, she was raising money for the legal defense of the Scottsboro Boys. These were 9 young African-American men who were wrongly accused of a violent crime, completely trumped up charges. She worked for the NAACP, the Montgomery Improvement Association, and she sued the Montgomery County Board of Education to desegregate the schools. She did a lot. Well, when she was a young woman, she attended school with Rosa Louise McCauley, whose married name was Rosa Parks. And she and Rosa Parks were friends throughout their lives. And occasionally Rosa Parks, who later moved to Detroit, would return to Alabama to visit. And she and Johnny Carr and a third friend, Virginia Dewar, would sit and talk for hours. Virginia Dewar was a white woman who also was a civil rights activist from the 30s. She paid Rosa Parks' way to Highlander Folk School. And Highlander Folk School is where a lot of activists really gained the skills and motivation to launch and sustain the civil rights movement. So, she went to Highlander a year before the bus boycott. These ladies went way back, and they were tight. When Rosa Parks would come to town, Johnny Carr would call up Bryan Stevenson. "Bryan, Ms. Parks is coming to town. We're going to sit together and talk. Do you want to come over and listen?" And Bryan Stevenson would say, "Yes, ma'am, I do." And Johnny Carr would ask, "Well, what are you going to do when you get here?" And Bryan Stevenson would say, "I'm going to listen," which he did happily for hours. On one of those visits, Rosa Parks turned to him and asked, "Now, Bryan, tell me who you are and what you're doing." And Bryan Stevenson first looked at Johnny Carr, and she gave him the nods. So he launched into his rap about the Equal Justice Initiative. "Well, we're trying to challenge justice. We're trying to help people who have been wrongly convicted. We're trying to confront bias and discrimination in the criminal justice system. We're trying to end life without parole sentences for children. We're trying to do something about the death penalty. We're trying to end mass incarceration." When he was done, Rosa Parks looked at him and said, "That's gonna make you tired, tired, tired." And Ms. Carr leaned forward, put her finger into his face and said, "That's why you've got to be brave, brave, brave." Dr. King told us that courage is the determination not to be overwhelmed by any object, and that however frightful the circumstances, courage enables us to stand up to any fear. And right now, many of our fears are not mere snakes under the carpet. Trouble is a reality in this strange medley of life, and in this moment of history particularly. I mean, here we are on the eve of Martin Luther King Day and on the eve of an increasingly dangerous and perilous time for our democracy and for the human rights of some of the most vulnerable among us. We are going to have to be brave, brave, brave. It helps me to remember that Rosa Parks did not know any more in her day and age what was going to happen than we know in ours. She refused to give up her seat without knowing if her actions would change anything or what kind of trouble it would bring her. She just had to be brave, brave, brave. And sometimes we might think that people like Bryan Stevenson or Rosa Parks or Johnny Carr were somehow different than the rest of us, that they came out of the womb fearless and wise, that they didn't have to find bravery within or learn as they went the way the rest of us do. And maybe they, in a way, they are different. I mean, what they accomplished was amazing and took tremendous bravery and perseverance and wisdom. And I certainly can't hold my life up to theirs. And yet, I think the narrative that only special people can make a difference does us all a disservice. We are all somebody with the capacity to make some difference for somebody else. Dr. King told us that courage is the determination not to be overwhelmed by any object, however frightful. And he knew truly frightening circumstances himself. He knew evil and pain in this conundrum of life are close to each of us. And yet, he said, these forces that threaten to negate life must be challenged by courage, which is the power of life to affirm itself in spite of life's ambiguities. He was often speaking to and lifting up the Black community, of course, but he, in no uncertain terms, said we all have a role in defending freedom and human rights. He believed that everybody was somebody who could exercise a creative will to hew out a stone of hope from a mountain of despair. And sometimes when the troubles of our nation and world, our planet, seem insurmountably large to me, I shift my focus to how I can hew out some small stone of hope, maybe some tiny stone of hope, out of that mountain of despair. I turn my attention to how I can take some small action alongside many others and make a difference for one person, one situation, one community. Just because the actions we may take are small compared to all that is, or compared to other people, it doesn't mean they're not worthwhile. And when all of those tiny stones of hope are piled together, they can make a mountain. We don't know what is ahead. I certainly don't. But I do know that we will not face the days ahead alone. People who love equality, freedom, democracy, people who hunger for a world that grants human dignity to everyone, those people are right here in this room with us now. Those people live in our communities. They are all over the country and all over the world, and we may not be in a majority in all places, but we are all here. And we will continue to find ways to offer one another love and hope, no matter the object we may face. I know it's tempting, very tempting, to want to squirrel ourselves away in whatever corner of privilege we might have and hide. Hide from the knowledge of others' suffering. Hide from the difficulty of the stories that folks are carrying. And to some degree, we all have to do that sometimes. I mean, we have to turn off the TV, turn off the internet, the news, make space for quiet, rest, and joy so we don't crack. I mean, we really do need to do that. That's okay and necessary. But we need to not cut ourselves off completely. When we do that, we not only cut ourselves off from the humanities of others, but we cut ourselves off from our own humanity. Instead, we can open our hearts to the stories of those around us. We can get and stay proximate with our hearts. We can know that other hearts are there with us, grieving, hoping, enduring alongside of us. And together we can learn to be strong, steady, and stubborn, like those mules of Gee's Bend. Like them, we can take our time, work hard, and never back down. And when the progress is really slow, it doesn't matter. It's still going forward. And maybe in small pockets, but those small pockets matter. Together, we can find ways that make a difference, that matter. We can be here for one another, offering each other love and courage. May it be so. In a moment, we will sing our closing hymn, number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing. But it's important to give some context to this particular song. It's been said that this was one of Dr. King's favorite hymns, and it is a profound celebration of Black survival, Black hope, Black joy and strength. But Lift Every Voice and Sing is not any old hymn. It is considered by many to be the African American national anthem. It is that important. Unitarian Universalist community minister Reverend Aisha Ansano notes that this hymn is often sung on MLK Day in schools or church or community celebration. She says it's a very, very powerful song, but it's often sung without context, and at times it's sung without a lot of intentionality. She asks, when you sing Lift Every Voice and Sing, do you pay close attention to the words? Lyrics like, sing a song of faith the dark past has taught us. Bitter the chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn had died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Those are intense lyrics. She says it's a song that starkly names the horrors and violence of racism in this country, and it is a song that makes us uncomfortable because it should make us uncomfortable. She asks us to sing with intentionality, with awareness of the deep discomfort purposely acknowledged in the lyrics, and with an awareness that those words do not refer to a distant history, but also what is happening today. She asks, will you commit to sitting with your own discomfort, and then will you tap into that discomfort and do something? It's a powerful hymn, and it takes some courage to enter it, to take it into our hearts and respond with commitment and love, and to sing with commitment and love. So let us plant our feet and lift our voices and sing until heaven and earth ring with the harmonies of liberty. Please rise in body or spirit, for Lift Every Voice and Sing. Thank you. Thank you for belting it out. I appreciate it. A special thank you today to our guest pianist. Thank you for being here and gifting us with your music. Our closing words are from the Reverend Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. We join in the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And please rise in body or in spirit, and with your hands over your heart or holding a hand of those next to you, or whatever posture is most fitting for you, we sing words of blessing one to another.
Did any of you catch who it was that was going into hospice? You can unmute now and talk if you like. Hey, Nita.
Can you guys not hear the piano?
I can
Yeah,
hear.
I can hear it.
Oh, okay.
It was hard to hear some of the, when she was telling the story, it was hard to hear. Did any of you catch who it was that went to hospice?
The brother of Barbara is considering